Hi, the Mudbrooker here. The other night I was watching Dynamite Ruby's video where she recounted her experiences when she was young, going to a Baptist school. It got me thinking. I too went to a Baptist school when I was young, and I've threatened in a few comment sections over the years to make a video about that, but this ain't that video. You see, listening to Ruby got me thinking about my great-aunt Ruby. Well, my great-great-aunt Ruby, actually. Thinking about great-great-aunt Ruby led to thoughts of the St. Joseph's Apartments, which led to St. Joseph's Hospital, which took me back to the summer of 1976. When I was a wee lad, I had the all-time greatest ultimate fort in the history of all mankind. Where other kids would pile up boxes and junk and pretend they were castle walls, I had the real thing. Genuine stone walls, baby. Where we lived, there was an old barn foundation on the property. The original barn had burned down or blown down in a storm decades before, but the stone foundation walls were still there. Over the years, the weather and the frost had heaved and cracked the concrete floor quite a bit, but the center aisle was still intact, as were the stalls and the mangers. Over time, enough soil had accumulated in the old gutters that a dense stand of sumac had sprouted. So this old barn foundation could be a jungle, it could be a castle, could be any kind of fortification, could be a mountain ridge, could be any of those things or none of them, depending on which direction a young boy's imagination went that day. But best of all, out behind the barn foundation was an old junk pile. In those days, people usually just burned their garbage and left whatever was behind. So, digging around and rooting through that old junk pile, I found all kinds of bottles and cans, broken glass, razor-sharp rusty metal, bits of twisted iron which made excellent playthings. I even still have some of the old patent medicine bottles that I found. Now, some of these bottles and jars still had intact lids, and they were the best thing because take a little cow shit, some water, toadstools, whatever slimy, creepy, crawly, nasty things that you find growing, put them in the jar, screw the lid down tight, leave them sit in the sun for a few days, they would ferment. When you took one of those jars of fermenting shit and threw it at a wall, it would explode with a satisfying pop and a hideous stench. So one day, me and my friend Dougie were up on the walls repelling hordes of invaders by throwing our glass grenades at them when we ran out of ammunition. So I climbed down off the walls, grabbed us a few more bottles, turned to go back, and I tripped over a pile of old plowshares we had laying there. When I hit the floor, one of the bottles broke and cut the shit out of my wrist. You can see the scars here. I trimmed some of the hair off so you could get a little better look. Well, with all the blood pouring down my arm, me and my friend Doug snuck back into the house. Dad was working in the garage that day, and Ma had gone to town for groceries or something or other. Snuck into the house, washed it all up, and wrapped my arm with an old ace bandage. I think we did a splendid job of first aid for a couple of 7-year-olds, so we decided the best thing we could do was go back out to the barn and continue our battle. As we were heading out, walking past the garage, Dad noticed the bloody ace bandage on my arm and asked me just what the hell I had done to myself this time. Oh, nothing. Well, let me have a look. So he unwrapped my arm, took a look at the cuts and said, well, we're going to the hospital, boy. You need stitches on that. So we dropped Dougie off and headed into the St. Joseph's Hospital, which led to several firsts in my young life. It was my first trip to the emergency room, well, my first trip to the hospital since I've been born, actually. My first ride in an elevator, my first local anesthetic, my first stitches, and when the doctor found out what was in the bottles I was carrying, I got my first massive dose of antibiotics. He cleaned out the wound, picked out a couple of small glass shards that me and Dougie hadn't noticed, and stitched it up and sent me home. Along with all of those firsts that day, there were actually a couple of lasts that I was involved in, not directly, but I was there for them. You see, I was one of the last few patients to be treated at the old St. Joseph's Hospital. A couple of weeks after my little trip to the emergency room, all hospital operations were transferred to the new hospital, which had been completed on the outside of town. The old building was converted into elderly apartments, and by the time my great-great-aunt Ruby moved into an apartment there to live out the rest of her days, I was in a Baptist school. I really ought to make a video about that one of these days.